The Sterling Grand Hotel lobby falls silent as a woman in an elegant business suit walks through the entrance, flanked by executives carrying leather portfolios. Hotel manager Gregory Thornton's smug expression dissolves into horror as he recognizes the black woman he denied service to 30 minutes earlier. "Good afternoon, staff," Olivia Sterling announces, her voice carrying authority throughout the marble lobby. "I'm the owner of Sterling Luxury Hotels. Some of you may not know me, as I prefer to visit properties incognito to assess our service standards." Her eyes find Thornton, who has gone pale. "Mr. Thornton, I believe we need to discuss why you refused to honor my confirmed reservation for the presidential suite, told me it was not available for someone like me, and suggested I try a more affordable establishment down the street." The gathered staff freezes. Several gasp audibly. Concierge Maria Vasquez covers her mouth in shock. "Ma'am, I didn't realize," Thornton stammers. "You didn't realize I owned this hotel," Olivia interrupts calmly. "Or you didn't realize that denying service based on someone's appearance violates every value this company stands for." The manager who 30 minutes ago had treated her with contempt now faces the owner whose entire chain he just disgraced, and his career is about to end in front of everyone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Commercial flight, traveling alone, and dressed in comfortable business casual attire. At 38, she had built Sterling Luxury Hotels from a single boutique property, inherited from her mentor, into a 23-hotel chain known for exceptional service and genuine hospitality. Her success story was remarkable. A black woman who had started as a front desk clerk at age 19 and through dedication, business acumen, and a $2 million loan from her mentor Walter Harrison had created a hospitality empire worth over $800 million. But success had brought challenges that wealth couldn't solve. As Sterling Hotels grew, Olivia struggled to maintain the service culture that had made the brand successful. Corporate expansion often meant hiring managers focused on efficiency and profit margins, rather than the genuine care for guests that Olivia considered non-negotiable. Her solution was unconventional but effective: unannounced visits to her properties while traveling incognito, experiencing her hotels as an ordinary guest would. She had learned more from these undercover assessments than from any corporate report or scheduled inspection. When service was exceptional, she could identify practices to replicate across the chain. When service failed, she could address problems before they damaged the brand's reputation. The Sterling Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago was her flagship property, the crown jewel of the chain, where she had personally overseen every design detail and hired what she believed was the finest hospitality team in the industry. The hotel's reputation was impeccable: 5-star ratings, countless awards, and a waiting list for their signature presidential suite that extended months in advance. Gregory Thornton had been managing the property for 3 years, hired based on his impressive resume from competing luxury chains. His performance metrics were strong: occupancy rates above 90%, revenue growth of 12% annually, and generally positive guest feedback. On paper, he was exactly the kind of manager Olivia's corporate team recommended for flagship properties. What the metrics didn't capture, and what Olivia was about to discover firsthand, was that Thornton's success came with a troubling approach to guest selection. He had developed an unofficial policy of maintaining standards that prioritized guests who fit his narrow definition of appropriate clientele for a luxury property. A definition that correlated suspiciously with race and appearance rather than actual ability to afford the accommodations. Olivia had booked her reservation under her married name, Olivia Martin, using a personal credit card rather than corporate accounts. The reservation was for the presidential suite, booked 2 weeks in advance at the standard rate of $2,800 per night. Everything about the booking was routine and properly confirmed. Her decision to visit the Chicago property had been prompted by concerning patterns in guest feedback data. While overall satisfaction remained high, Olivia's analytics team had noticed a troubling trend. Minority guests and younger travelers reported slightly lower satisfaction scores at the Chicago property compared to other Sterling hotels, with comments about feeling unwelcome or judged during check-in. The differences were subtle enough that most executives would have dismissed them as statistical noise, but Olivia had built her company on the principle that hospitality meant making every guest feel valued, regardless of their background. Even small disparities in how different guests were treated represented failures that needed investigation. As she rode the taxi from O'Hare to downtown Chicago, Olivia reviewed her plan. She would check in as a regular guest, assess the service quality throughout her stay, meet with corporate staff the following morning, and then reveal her identity to address any issues she discovered. The approach had worked well at other properties, usually revealing minor service gaps that could be quickly corrected. What she didn't anticipate was that the manager of her flagship property harbored the exact kind of discriminatory attitudes that her entire corporate culture was designed to prevent. The professional outfit she wore, tailored blazer, quality handbag, and understated jewelry that actually cost more than most people's monthly salary, would be dismissed by Thornton as insufficient evidence that she belonged in a luxury hotel. The taxi pulled up to the Sterling Grand's entrance, where the Art Deco facade gleamed in the afternoon sun. The property was beautiful, exactly as Olivia had designed it, elegant without being ostentatious, welcoming without being casual. She felt pride seeing her vision realized so perfectly in architecture and design. If only the human elements of hospitality matched the physical excellence of the building. Bellhop Andre Williams opened her taxi door with a professional smile. "Welcome to the Sterling Grand, ma'am. May I help with your luggage?" His genuine warmth was exactly what Olivia expected from her staff. She smiled back, tipping him generously as he retrieved her single suitcase. She traveled light for these incognito visits. "Thank you. I have a reservation under Martin." "Wonderful. Our front desk will take excellent care of you." The lobby was as stunning as Olivia remembered from her last official visit 6 months earlier. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and fresh flowers arranged in massive displays that filled the space with subtle fragrance. Everything looked perfect. What she was about to discover was that beautiful spaces meant nothing if the people running them treated guests with prejudice rather than hospitality. As Olivia approached the front desk, where assistant manager Bethany Walsh and hotel manager Gregory Thornton stood reviewing paperwork, she had no idea that the next 30 minutes would reveal everything wrong with her flagship property and test whether her company's stated values were genuine commitments or merely corporate rhetoric. Olivia approached the gleaming marble reception desk where hotel manager Gregory Thornton stood with assistant manager Bethany Walsh, both reviewing what appeared to be VIP arrival sheets for the evening. Thornton glanced up as she approached, and his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a microaggression so subtle that most people might miss it. But Olivia had experienced enough racial bias to recognize the instant assessment and dismissal. "May I help you?" Thornton asked, his tone carrying a subtle edge that suggested he was already questioning why she was at his luxury hotel's front desk. "Yes, I have a reservation." Olivia Martin, checking in for 3 nights in the presidential suite. The statement was straightforward and professional, but Thornton's reaction was immediate skepticism. He exchanged a quick glance with Walsh that spoke volumes about their shared assumption. This black woman in business casual attire couldn't possibly have a legitimate reservation for their most expensive accommodation. "The presidential suite," Thornton repeated with barely concealed doubt. "Are you certain about that reservation?" Olivia felt familiar frustration rising but maintained her composure. "Yes, I'm quite certain. I booked it 2 weeks ago under the name Olivia Martin. The confirmation number is in my email if you need it." Thornton made a show of checking his computer system, his fingers moving slowly across the keyboard as though he was conducting an exceptionally thorough search, rather than simply looking up a confirmed reservation. I'm showing a reservation under that name, but there must be some mistake," he said, his voice carrying false sympathy. "The presidential suite has very specific requirements and advanced booking procedures. Perhaps you meant to book one of our standard rooms." The condescension was unmistakable. Olivia pulled out her phone and displayed the confirmation email, which clearly showed her reservation for the presidential suite, the dates, and the nightly rate of $2,800. "Here's my confirmation. Everything appears to be in order." Thornton barely glanced at the email before dismissing it. "Yes, well, sometimes our online system makes errors with suite-level bookings. The presidential suite is actually not available for your dates. We can offer you a standard room instead at a more appropriate price point." The suggestion that the suite level was somehow inappropriate for her, based on nothing but his visual assessment, was discriminatory in the most obvious way, yet delivered with the polished courtesy that made it difficult to challenge without seeming unreasonable. Assistant Manager Walsh nodded in agreement with her boss, enabling the discrimination through her complicit silence and supportive body language. Concierge Maria Vasquez, working at her desk 10 feet away, heard the exchange and felt growing discomfort. She could see the confirmation on Olivia's phone and knew the presidential suite was actually available. She had checked the availability log that morning, but contradicting the hotel manager publicly would risk her job, and she hesitated, torn between professional ethics and economic necessity. "I don't want a standard room," Olivia said firmly but calmly. "I specifically booked the presidential suite. It's confirmed, and according to your own system, it's available. I'd like you to honor my reservation." Thornton's expression hardened at what he perceived as inappropriate insistence from someone he had already decided didn't belong at his hotel. "Ma'am, I'm trying to be helpful here. The presidential suite is our most exclusive accommodation, typically reserved for corporate executives, celebrities, and VIP guests. I'm certain you would be more comfortable in one of our standard rooms, or perhaps—" He paused meaningfully before delivering his most blatant insult yet. "Perhaps you would find a more affordable establishment down the street to be better suited to your needs." The suggestion that she couldn't afford the room she had already booked and paid deposit on was nakedly discriminatory, based purely on his assessment of her appearance rather than any actual information about her financial capability. Business traveler Dr. Philip Chen, who was waiting behind Olivia to check in, had been listening with increasing disbelief. As an Asian American physician who had experienced his own share of discrimination, he recognized exactly what was happening. He quietly pulled out his phone and began recording, sensing that this interaction was going to become significant. "Let me be very clear," Olivia said, her voice remaining calm but taking on an edge of steel. "I have a confirmed reservation for the presidential suite. I have paid the required deposit. Your system shows the suite is available. You are refusing to honor my legitimate reservation based on assumptions about my financial capability that you're making based on my appearance. That is discrimination, and it violates both federal law and basic standards of hospitality." Her direct naming of the discrimination made Thornton uncomfortable, but he doubled down on his position rather than backing down. "Ma'am, I don't appreciate the accusation. I'm simply trying to manage our property's standards and ensure appropriate room assignments. If you're not satisfied with the accommodations we're able to offer you, I'm afraid we cannot help you." The explicit refusal of service was now documented, witnessed by multiple people, and being recorded by Dr. Chen. Thornton had crossed from subtle discrimination into blatant denial of service that would be impossible to justify under any legitimate business policy. "So you're refusing to honor my confirmed reservation?" Olivia asked, wanting absolute clarity for the record. "I'm suggesting you would be more comfortable elsewhere," Thornton replied, trying to frame his discrimination as customer service rather than bias. "I see," Olivia said quietly. "In that case, I'll need your name and title, and I'll need you to put your refusal in writing." This request clearly irritated Thornton, who was accustomed to his authority going unquestioned. "That won't be necessary. My name is Gregory Thornton. I'm the hotel manager, and I've made my position clear. I'm afraid I have other guests to attend to." His dismissal was meant to end the conversation, to assert his power to determine who belonged at his hotel and who didn't. What he failed to consider was that his authority was derivative. He managed the property, but someone else owned it. And that owner was standing right in front of him, documenting exactly how he treated guests who didn't match his prejudiced expectations of who deserved luxury service. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Olivia stood at the reception desk for several seconds after Thornton's dismissal, processing the blatant discrimination she had just experienced at her own flagship property. The moment crystallized everything that could go wrong when a company's stated values weren't reinforced. Through every level of operations, a manager could build a reputation for efficiency while systematically violating the principles that the business was founded on. "Mr. Thornton," Olivia said, Her voice carrying enough authority that several staff members nearby paused their activities to listen. "I'm going to give you one more opportunity to honor my confirmed reservation before I escalate this to your corporate office." The threat of corporate intervention seemed to amuse rather than concern him. "Ma'am, I am the manager of this property. Corporate trusts my judgment about maintaining our standards. If you'd like to file a complaint, you're welcome to contact our guest relations department. But my decision stands." His confidence reflected a belief that his position insulated him from accountability, that his track record of strong performance metrics would protect him from consequences for discriminatory service. He had clearly gotten away with similar behavior before and saw no reason why this situation would be different. Assistant Manager Walsh stepped forward, attempting to support her boss while adopting a tone of false reasonableness. "Ma'am, perhaps if you could provide additional verification of your reservation details, we could sort this out. Do you have a credit card that matches the booking name?" The request was designed to create additional hurdles, suggesting that Olivia's confirmation email and identification weren't sufficient, despite being exactly what any other guest would need to provide. Olivia pulled out her wallet and presented a credit card with Olivia Martin embossed on it, her married name, which she used for personal travel. "Here's the card used for the booking. Now will you honor my reservation?" Thornton examined the card with the same skepticism he had shown for everything else, as though a credit card somehow could be fraudulent despite matching all the booking information. "The credit card processor is running slowly right now. This could take a while to verify." The obvious stalling tactic was meant to frustrate Olivia into leaving, removing the problem through attrition rather than service. But Olivia had built a hospitality empire through patience and strategic thinking, and she wasn't going anywhere. "I'll wait," she said simply, taking a seat in the lobby where she could monitor the front desk. Her presence clearly irritated Thornton, who preferred his discrimination to be efficient rather than prolonged. He muttered something to Walsh about problem guests, just loudly enough for Olivia to hear, another deliberate insult meant to pressure her to leave. Dr. Chen, still recording on his phone, approached Olivia during this interlude. "Excuse me, ma'am. I couldn't help but overhear what just happened. I'm a guest here, and I want you to know that I witnessed the entire exchange. If you need a witness statement for any complaint you file, I'm happy to provide one." His offer demonstrated the kind of ally behavior that helped counter discrimination, recognizing injustice and offering tangible support rather than passive sympathy. "Thank you," Olivia replied genuinely. "I appreciate your willingness to speak up." Regular guest Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, who had been checking in with another front desk clerk during Olivia's exchange with Thornton, approached as well. At 67, Hayes had been staying at Sterling Properties for 15 years and had developed fierce loyalty to the brand. "I'm absolutely appalled by what I just witnessed," Hayes told Olivia quietly. "I've stayed at Sterling hotels across the country, and this is not how they're supposed to treat guests. I'm going to contact corporate myself to report this manager's behavior." The support from other guests provided validation but also highlighted the central irony of the situation. Longtime Sterling customers recognized that Thornton's behavior violated the brand's values, yet he believed his discrimination was appropriate for maintaining standards. Bellhop Andre Williams, who had greeted Olivia so warmly when she arrived, watched the unfolding situation with visible distress. At 23, he'd been working at the Sterling Grand for 2 years and had noticed troubling patterns in how Thornton treated certain guests, but speaking up against a manager seemed impossible. For someone in his entry-level position, concierge, Maria Vasquez finally found her courage after watching Olivia sit calmly in the lobby for 20 minutes while Thornton made no effort to actually process her reservation. She approached the reception desk during a moment when both Thornton and Walsh were in the back office. "Ms. Martin," Vasquez said quietly, "I want to apologize for what you're experiencing. The presidential suite is definitely available. I checked the system myself. What's happening to you is wrong, and I'm ashamed that it's happening at our hotel. Her whispered acknowledgement of the discrimination was risky for her, professionally but important for Olivia to hear. Not all staff shared their manager's prejudiced approach to hospitality. Thank you for saying that, Olivia replied. I appreciate your integrity. When Thornton emerged from the back office and saw Vasquez speaking with Olivia, his expression darkened. Maria, I need you to focus on your own responsibilities rather than involving yourself in situations that don't concern you. The rebuke was meant to intimidate Vasquez into silence, reinforcing the culture where discrimination was protected through staff fear of retaliation for speaking up. As the confrontation stretched beyond 30 minutes, with Olivia still waiting for Thornton to honor her reservation and Thornton still insisting she leave the property, the situation was attracting attention from other guests and staff. The manager's discrimination was becoming a public spectacle that he could no longer contain through dismissiveness or intimidation. What Thornton didn't know was that Olivia had sent a text message to her Chief Operating Officer James Caldwell, experiencing serious discrimination at Chicago property. Manager refuses to honor my reservation. Prepare for immediate intervention. Coming in with full corporate team in 30 minutes. The manager, who thought his authority was absolute, was about to discover that he worked for someone whose authority was considerably more substantial and whose commitment to hospitality values wasn't negotiable. While Olivia endured Gregory Thornton's discrimination in the Sterling Grand lobby, her text message to COO James Caldwell triggered an immediate corporate response that would converge on the property with devastating consequences for the manager's career. Caldwell had been in Sterling Hotels, corporate headquarters 20 minutes away, reviewing quarterly performance reports when Olivia's text arrived. At 55, he had worked with Olivia for 12 years and knew that she wouldn't characterize something as serious discrimination unless it genuinely met that threshold. Her understated communication style meant that if she used strong language, the situation was severe. Cancel my afternoon meetings, Caldwell told his assistant. I need the corporate legal team, VP of Guest Experience, and Regional Director Bradford in a car heading to the Chicago property immediately. Within 10 minutes, a team of 4 executives was en route to the Sterling Grand, each reviewing Thornton's personnel file and the property's recent performance data. What they found was a troubling pattern that metrics alone had obscured. VP of Guest Experience, Diane Murphy, pulled up detailed guest feedback analysis that her department tracked. Caldwell, look at this. Chicago property has the highest overall satisfaction scores in the chain, but when we disaggregate by guest demographics, there's a significant gap. Minority guests rate their check-in experience 15% lower than white guests at this property, while there's no such gap at our other locations. The statistical evidence suggested systematic bias in how Thornton and his team treated different guests, though the overall positive scores had masked the disparity in corporate. Reports that aggregated all feedback together, regional. Director Thomas Bradford had conducted Thornton's last 3 performance reviews and felt growing alarm that he had missed signs of the manager's discriminatory practices. His revenue numbers were so strong that I didn't dig deeper into potential service quality issues with specific guest segments. This is a failure of my oversight. Corporate counsel Rachel Kim was already calculating legal exposure. If the owner of the company experienced actionable discrimination at our flagship property, that suggests systematic failures in training, supervision, and accountability. We need to document everything and prepare for comprehensive remediation. Meanwhile, Dr. Philip Chen had uploaded his video of Thornton's discriminatory behavior to social media with the caption, "Refused service at a Sterling Grand Hotel despite confirmed reservation. Manager told me I should try more affordable hotels. This is discrimination in 2024. He had deliberately misidentified himself as the victim rather than witness to protect Olivia's anonymity. But the video was already being shared rapidly across platforms. Travel blogger Yasmin Patel, who happened to be staying at the Sterling Grand while researching a piece about luxury hotels, saw Chen's video and recognized the lobby as the property where she was currently staying. She had been treated with professional courtesy during her check-in, but as a hospitality industry journalist, she knew how to investigate whether individual positive experiences masked systematic problems. Patel began interviewing staff members informally, asking about their experiences working under Thornton's management. 3 employees, speaking on condition of anonymity, described troubling patterns, certain guests being told suites weren't available when they actually were, young minority guests being asked for additional payment verification beyond standard procedures, and an unofficial manager approval requirement for suite-level bookings by anyone Thornton deemed questionable. "It's not official policy," one front desk clerk told Patel nervously, "but we know which guests will trigger Mr. Thornton's scrutiny. If someone doesn't look like his idea of a luxury hotel guest, he finds reasons to push them to standard rooms or suggest they'd be happier elsewhere." The pattern Patel was documenting aligned perfectly with what Olivia had experienced, suggesting that this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather Thornton's standard operating procedure that had somehow avoided corporate detection. Back at corporate headquarters, members of Sterling Hotel's board of directors were being notified about the emerging situation. Board chair Margaret Chen received Caldwell's briefing with growing alarm. Discrimination by the flagship property's manager wasn't just an operations failure, but a potential existential threat to the brand's reputation. "Our entire market position is built on genuine hospitality that makes every guest feel valued," Chen told fellow board members during an emergency conference call. "If we've been systematically failing minority guests while celebrating our overall service scores, that represents fundamental betrayal of our stated values." The board authorized whatever resources were necessary to address the situation comprehensively, including external audits of all properties to ensure Chicago's problems weren't replicated elsewhere in the chain. Meanwhile, competitor CEO Daniel Brooks saw Chen's viral video and recognized an opportunity to position his hotel chain as more genuinely committed to inclusive service than Sterling Hotels appeared to be. He drafted a statement that would be released shortly. "At competitor hotels, we believe luxury hospitality means making every guest feel welcome, regardless of appearance or background. Recent reports suggest not all hotel chains share this commitment." The competitive threat added urgency to Sterling's response. Beyond the moral imperative to address discrimination, there was now business necessity to demonstrate the incident was aberration rather than systemic failure. At the Sterling Grand, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes had contacted Sterling's corporate customer service line, providing a detailed witness account of Thornton's treatment of Olivia. Her status as a 15-year loyal customer with Diamond Elite status gave her complaints. Additional weight with corporate representatives, who flagged her report for immediate escalation. All these parallel threads: corporate response team en route, viral social media exposure, journalistic investigation, board-level alarm, competitive pressure, and customer complaints were converging on the Sterling Grand Hotel, where Gregory Thornton continued to believe his authority was protected and his discrimination would face no meaningful consequences. He had no idea that within minutes the lobby would fill with corporate executives, that his behavior was spreading across social media, or that his victim was actually the owner whose values he had systematically violated while managing her flagship property. Olivia had been sitting in the Sterling Grand lobby for 45 minutes when she received a text from James Caldwell. "Corporate team arriving in 5 minutes. Legal recommends we document everything before revealing your identity. How do you want to proceed? Her response was immediate and strategic. Let Thornton continue his discrimination in front of corporate team. I want witnesses to his actual behavior, not just what he'll claim happened. Then we reveal together the approach would create undeniable documentation of Thornton's discriminatory practices while ensuring that corporate leadership witnessed firsthand how he treated guests he perceived as unworthy of luxury service. Caldwell's team entered the Sterling Grand through the main entrance, 4 executives in business, attire carrying corporate credentials and briefcases. Front desk supervisor Kurt Morrison noticed their arrival and immediately recognized the corporate badges, his expression shifting to alarm as he realized something significant was happening. Thornton emerged from his office to greet what he assumed were corporate visitors conducting a routine inspection. "Good afternoon. I'm Gregory Thornton, the hotel manager. We weren't expecting a corporate visit today. This is an unscheduled operational assessment," Caldwell replied neutrally. "We're here to observe your check-in procedures and guest service protocols." The explanation was technically accurate while omitting the crucial detail that they were specifically investigating Thornton's discriminatory denial of service. To the owner of the company, VP Murphy gestured toward Olivia, who was still sitting patiently in the lobby. "I notice that guest has been waiting for quite some time. Is there a problem with her reservation?" Thornton's expression suggested he viewed this as an opportunity to justify his earlier discrimination to corporate leadership. "That guest presented a questionable reservation for our presidential suite. I determined it would be more appropriate to offer her alternative accommodations." "Questionable in what way?" Regional Director Bradford asked, his tone carefully neutral. The reservation details seemed inconsistent with the guest's profile, Thornton replied, using vague corporate language to obscure his discriminatory reasoning. "Our presidential suite is typically reserved for VIP guests and corporate travelers. I exercised managerial discretion in offering more suitable alternatives." Corporate counsel Kim spoke up. "Could you be more specific about what made the reservation questionable? Does the guest have a confirmed booking?" Thornton's discomfort grew as the corporate team pressed for details. "Well, yes. Technically, there's a reservation in the system, but anyone can make an online booking. It's my responsibility to ensure appropriate placement of guests based on the property's standards and typical clientele profile. So you're denying service based on your assessment of whether the guest fits your clientele profile, rather than whether they have a confirmed reservation and ability to pay?" Bradford asked, his tone sharpening. The direct question trapped Thornton. Admitting his decision was based on clientele profile would be acknowledging discrimination, but he had already committed to that justification in front of corporate leadership. Before he could answer, Olivia stood and approached the group. "Perhaps I can clarify the situation. I have a confirmed reservation for the presidential suite under the name Olivia Martin. I provided my confirmation email, matching credit card, and identification. Mr. Thornton refused to honor my reservation and suggested I would be more comfortable at a more affordable establishment down the street. When I asked for his reasoning, he indicated that I don't fit his expectations for the type of guest who belongs in your presidential suite." She delivered this summary calmly and factually, allowing Thornton's discrimination to speak for itself without requiring emotional appeals or accusations. Thornton's face reddened. This guest is mischaracterizing a professional interaction about appropriate room assignment. "I have it all recorded," Dr. Chen interjected, stepping forward with his phone. "I witnessed the entire exchange and captured video of Mr. Thornton explicitly telling her the presidential suite was not available for someone like her, and suggesting she try a more affordable hotel. Would corporate like to see the footage?" The offer of video evidence eliminated any possibility of Thornton reframing the interaction as reasonable guest services. His discrimination was documented and witnessed by multiple parties. BP, Murphy turned to Olivia with professional courtesy that contrasted sharply with Thornton's treatment. "Ma'am, on behalf of Sterling Hotels, I apologize for this unacceptable service failure. Let me personally ensure your reservation is honored immediately with our sincere apologies and compensation for this experience." "Actually," Caldwell interjected, "before we proceed with check-in, there's something Mr. Thornton should know about this guest." He turned to address the manager directly. "Mr. Thornton, I'd like you to meet Olivia Sterling, the founder and CEO of Sterling Luxury Hotels. The guest you denied service to owns this property and every other hotel in our chain. The presidential suite you deemed her unworthy of. She personally designed it." The revelation hit Thornton with visible physical impact. His face drained of color, his confident posture collapsed, and his mouth opened and closed without producing sound. The realization that he had discriminated against his ultimate boss, that his career-ending mistake had been witnessed and documented by corporate leadership, seemed to overwhelm his capacity for response. Assistant Manager Walsh, who had enabled Thornton's discrimination through her complicit support, looked equally stricken. Concierge Vasquez, who had quietly objected to the treatment, allowed herself a small smile of vindication. The power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. The manager, who had felt entitled to determine who deserved luxury service, now stood before the owner whose values he had systematically violated. The Sterling Grand Lobby seemed to hold its collective breath as Olivia's identity settled over the assembled staff. Bellhop Andre Williams, who had witnessed Thornton's discrimination from his station near the entrance, felt a surge of relief that the manager's behavior was finally being exposed to someone with power to address it. Gregory Thornton found his voice, though it came out as a stammering attempt at damage control. "Mrs. Sterling, I had no idea. If I had known who you were, I would never have..." "Would never have what?" Olivia interrupted, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable steel. "Would never have discriminated based on appearance, or would never have gotten caught discriminating against someone with authority to hold you accountable." The question cut to the heart of the issue, whether Thornton's remorse was about his behavior or merely its consequences. "I apologize for any misunderstanding," Thornton attempted, switching to the passive corporate language that minimized his active discrimination. "There may have been a communication breakdown in how I explained our suite assignment protocols. Kuo." Caldwell stepped forward, his expression making clear that such deflection wouldn't be tolerated. "Mr. Thornton, we have video evidence of you explicitly denying Mrs. Sterling's service. Multiple witness statements, and your own admission to corporate team that you refused her reservation based on her not fitting your clientele profile. This wasn't a miscommunication, this was discrimination." Regional Director Bradford added context that deepened Thornton's culpability. "We've been reviewing guest feedback data while en route. Minority guests at this property report significantly lower satisfaction with check-in experiences compared to white guests and compared to our other properties. Your behavior toward Mrs. Sterling appears to represent a pattern, not an isolated incident. Corporate Counsel Kim delivered the legal implications." "Mr. Thornton, your documented denial of service based on discriminatory assessment violates federal civil rights laws, state public accommodation statutes, and every policy in Sterling Hotel's code of conduct. We have clear grounds for immediate termination and potential referral to regulatory authorities." But Olivia raised her hand, signaling she wanted to address the situation personally before corporate procedures took over. "Mr. Thornton, I want you to understand exactly what you did wrong today. You saw a black woman requesting service at your hotel and made assumptions about her worthiness based purely on appearance. You invented justifications for denying her confirmed reservation. You suggested she would be more appropriate at a more affordable establishment, implying her inability to afford luxury accommodations, despite having zero actual information about her financial capacity." She paused, letting each point land. But here's what concerns me even more than your treatment of me specifically. I own this hotel chain. I have resources, education, and authority to demand accountability. How many other guests have you treated this way who didn't have those advantages? How many people experienced the same discrimination but lacked the platform to challenge it? The questions hung in the air, transforming Olivia's individual experience into an indictment of systematic practices that harmed countless guests without consequences. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, the loyal Sterling customer, spoke up from where she had been observing. I've stayed at Sterling Properties for 15 years because they always made me feel welcome. What I witnessed today violated everything I thought this brand stood for. I'm grateful Mrs. Sterling was here to expose this manager's behavior, but how long has it been happening to guests who couldn't fight back? Her perspective as a long-time customer added external validation to Olivia's concerns about systematic rather than isolated discrimination. VP. Murphy addressed the assembled staff directly. Everyone working at this property needs to understand that what Mr. Thornton did today represents the opposite of Sterling Hotel's values. We don't just claim to welcome all guests, we actually do it consistently, regardless of anyone's appearance, age, race, or any other characteristic besides their desire for quality hospitality. Thornton made one final attempt at self-preservation. Mrs. Sterling, I've managed this property successfully for 3 years. Our revenue is up. Our ratings are excellent. Surely one misunderstanding doesn't erase that record. The appeal to performance metrics revealed his fundamental failure to understand what had just happened. Olivia's response was definitive. Mr. Thornton, your revenue was built partially on discriminating against guests who you decided didn't fit your profile for luxury travelers. Your excellent ratings came from the guests you deemed worthy of good service, while minority guests reported significantly worse experiences. You didn't just make one mistake today. You exposed a pattern of discrimination that generated apparent success while violating everything this company stands for. She turned to Caldwell. James, Mr. Thornton is terminated effective immediately. Ms. Walsh as well, for enabling his discrimination. Security should escort them both from the property. Within the hour, the swift decision demonstrated that discrimination would face immediate consequences regardless of performance metrics or tenure. Additionally, Olivia continued, I want a comprehensive audit of every employee at this property. Anyone who witnessed discriminatory practices and failed to report them needs retraining at minimum. Anyone who actively participated in discrimination faces termination. Our values aren't negotiable. She addressed the remaining staff directly. For those of you who maintained integrity, like Maria Vasquez, who quietly acknowledged the wrong being done, and Andre Williams, who treated every guest with genuine warmth, thank you. You represent what Sterling Hotels should be. Vasquez looked stunned to be publicly recognized, while Andre stood straighter, pride evident in his posture. I'll be staying at this property for the next 3 days, Olivia continued. During that time, I want to meet personally with every staff member to understand the culture Mr. Thornton created and how we rebuild it properly. This is our flagship property, and it needs to reflect our best values, not our worst failures. Thornton and Walsh were escorted out by security 15 minutes later, their corporate access badges confiscated, their careers in luxury hospitality effectively over. The speed of their removal sent an unmistakable message. Discrimination meant immediate consequences, regardless of previous performance or position. As the lobby slowly returned to normal operations, Dr. Chen approached Olivia. Mrs. Sterling, I posted video of the incident on social media before I knew who you were. It's being shared widely. I can delete it if you prefer privacy about what happened. Olivia considered briefly before shaking her head. Keep it posted. Change the caption to identify me correctly and explain that Sterling Hotels took immediate action. People need to see both the discrimination and the accountability. Transparency is how we rebuild trust. The following morning, Olivia convened a mandatory all-staff meeting in the Sterling Grand's Conference Center. 63 employees filled the room. Front desk clerks, housekeeping staff, restaurant servers, maintenance workers, and managers from every department. The atmosphere was tense, uncertain. Many staff members had worked under Thornton for years and were grappling with the revelation that their successful property had been built partially on discriminatory practices. "I want to address what happened yesterday directly," Olivia began, standing without podium or notes, maintaining eye contact with employees throughout the room. "Some of you witnessed Gregory Thornton deny me service based on discriminatory assumptions. Some of you have witnessed him treat other guests similarly. And some of you may have participated in or enabled that discrimination." The room was silent, tension evident in rigid postures and avoided eye contact. "I'm not here to mass fire everyone," she continued, "but I am here to make absolutely clear that discrimination has no place at Sterling Hotels, regardless of your position, tenure, or performance metrics. We will not sacrifice our values for revenue, and we will not tolerate managers who build success on bias." She displayed the guest satisfaction data Regional Director Bradford had compiled, projecting it on the large screen behind her. Minority guests at this property reported 15% lower satisfaction with check-in experiences than white guests. "There's no such disparity at our other 22 properties. That statistical gap represents real people who were made to feel unwelcome at a hotel that claims hospitality as its core value." Front desk clerk Jennifer Morrison raised her hand tentatively. "Mrs. Sterling, some of us noticed the patterns but didn't know how to report them without risking our jobs. Thornton controlled our schedules, our performance reviews, our advancement opportunities. Speaking up felt impossible." Several other employees nodded in agreement, their expressions reflecting the difficult position they had been placed in, choosing between financial security and moral integrity. Olivia nodded with understanding rather than judgment. "That's exactly why we're implementing new reporting systems. Every Sterling property will now have anonymous discrimination reporting channels that bypass property management and go directly to corporate HR. Additionally, we're creating protection policies for employees who report discrimination. Retaliation against whistleblowers will result in immediate termination of the retaliating manager." She introduced Sarah Chen, Sterling Hotel's newly appointed Chief Diversity Officer, who had flown in from corporate headquarters that morning. "Sarah will be conducting interviews with each of you individually over the next week. This is your opportunity to share experiences, concerns, and suggestions for how we create genuinely inclusive culture. No retaliation, no judgment, just honest conversation about how we improve." Housekeeping supervisor Rita Morales spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of long-suppressed frustration. "Mrs. Sterling, I've worked here for 8 years since before Thornton arrived. The culture changed when he took over. We went from genuinely welcoming all guests to this unspoken understanding that some guests mattered more than others. Staff members who questioned the approach were passed over for promotions or given unfavorable schedules. I'm glad you're addressing it, but it's been difficult to watch." Her testimony validated what Olivia had suspected. The discrimination wasn't just Thornton's personal bias, but had metastasized into institutional culture that affected hiring, advancement, and daily operations throughout the property. Restaurant manager David Kim added his perspective. "There were subtle signals about which guests deserved exceptional service versus standard service. Nothing explicitly stated, but the expectations were clear. VIP treatment was reserved for guests who looked a certain way, not for everyone who paid premium rates." Olivia listened to each testimony carefully, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. She wanted staff to feel heard and to understand that their experiences mattered in shaping the reforms that would follow. "Here's what's going to change. Effective immediately," Olivia announced after hearing from numerous staff members. "First, we're implementing comprehensive bias training for every employee, from entry-level to senior management. This isn't a one-time session, but quarterly ongoing education about recognizing and addressing discrimination. She outlined additional reforms, diverse hiring panels for all management positions, to prevent hiring managers from simply replicating their own biases. Regular third-party audits of guest experience data disaggregated by demographics to identify disparities before they became systematic, and guest feedback mechanisms that specifically asked about equitable treatment during their stay. Second, we're changing how we evaluate property performance. Revenue and occupancy rates matter, but they'll be weighted equally with inclusive service culture metrics. A property that generates strong financial results while making minority guests feel unwelcome is failing, not succeeding. VP Murphy elaborated on the new evaluation framework, explaining how properties would be assessed on demographic parity in guest satisfaction, staff diversity at all levels, and documented responses to discrimination complaints. Third, Olivia continued, we're creating advancement pathways for employees who demonstrate commitment to inclusive service. Maria Vasquez showed integrity by quietly objecting to my mistreatment despite the risk to her position. That's the kind of character we want in leadership roles. The announcement drew surprised reactions throughout the room. Several staff members exchanged meaningful glances, recognizing that the company's stated values were being backed by concrete career consequences and opportunities. Regional Director Bradford took responsibility publicly for his oversight failures. I focused on revenue metrics and ignored warning signs in qualitative feedback. I prioritized efficiency over equity, and that allowed Mr. Thornton's discrimination to continue unchecked. That's on me, and I'm committed to changing how I evaluate property performance going forward. His willingness to acknowledge failure rather than deflect blame set the tone for the accountability culture Olivia was trying to establish, one where leaders admitted mistakes and committed to learning from them rather than protecting themselves through denial or minimization. The meeting concluded with Olivia opening the floor for questions and concerns. Staff members asked about specific scenarios, sought clarification on new policies, and expressed cautious optimism about the cultural transformation being proposed. As employees filed out of the conference room, the atmosphere had shifted from tense uncertainty to tentative hope that genuine change might be possible. Over the next 72 hours, Olivia worked 18-hour days, implementing comprehensive reforms that would reshape not just the Chicago property, but the entire Sterling Hotels chain. She established a command center in the presidential suite, the accommodation Thornton had deemed her unworthy of, where corporate executives, legal counsel, HR specialists, and diversity consultants collaborated on systematic change. Corporate counsel Rachel Kim led the development of new anti-discrimination policies with specific, measurable protocols. The policies went beyond vague commitments to inclusivity, establishing concrete procedures, mandatory bias training for all employees quarterly, with completion tracked and tied to performance evaluations. Diverse hiring panels for management positions that included employee representatives and external diversity consultants. Regular third-party audits of guest experience data disaggregated by demographics. And clear escalation procedures for discrimination complaints that bypassed property management entirely. We're not just creating policies, Kim explained during a strategy session. We're building accountability mechanisms that make discrimination organizationally impossible to sustain. When bias training is optional, it gets deprioritized. When it's mandatory and tracked, it becomes part of operational culture. The VP of Guest Experience, Diane Murphy, redesigned the entire guest feedback system to specifically identify disparities in how different guest populations experience service. We can't manage what we don't measure, she explained to Olivia during their late-night working session. If we track satisfaction by demographic categories, we can identify problems before they become systematic. A 5% satisfaction gap might seem small in aggregate data, but it represents real discrimination affecting hundreds of guests. The new system would flag any property showing demographic disparities in guest satisfaction, triggering immediate investigation and remediation. Properties would be evaluated not just on overall scores, but on equitable distribution of positive experiences across all guest demographics. Regional Director Thomas Bradford took personal responsibility for his oversight failure, working with Olivia to develop new evaluation criteria that weighted inclusive service culture equally with financial performance. I focused on revenue metrics, occupancy rates, average daily rate, total revenue per available room, and ignored warning signs in qualitative feedback. That created incentives for managers like Thornton to maximize profit while discriminating against guests they perceived as less valuable. Rather than terminating Bradford for his oversight failures, Olivia worked with him to transform his approach. You recognized your mistake, and you're committed to fixing it systemically rather than just for this one property. That's the kind of accountability we need throughout the organization, she told him. Together, they developed a balanced scorecard for property evaluation that incorporated financial metrics, guest satisfaction across demographic categories, staff diversity and retention rates, and documented responses to service failures or discrimination complaints. Properties would be ranked not just on profit, but on how well they embodied Sterling Hotel's inclusive values. The Chicago property's interim manager, promoted from within, was concierge Maria Vasquez. Her integrity during Olivia's discriminatory treatment, quietly acknowledging the injustice despite the professional risk, made her an ideal choice to rebuild the culture. At 32, Vasquez had worked in hospitality for 12 years and understood both exceptional service and the subtle ways discrimination could undermine it. I want this property to be proof that luxury and inclusivity aren't contradictory, Olivia told Vasquez during her first day as manager. Genuine hospitality means making every guest feel valued, regardless of who they are or what they look like. That's not just ethically right, it's better business. Vasquez embraced the challenge with thoughtful strategy. She established a welcome committee of staff members from diverse backgrounds who would regularly assess check-in procedures, evaluate whether all guests received equivalent treatment, and provide confidential feedback about potential bias in service delivery. We're not trying to catch people making mistakes, Vasquez explained to her staff. We're trying to build systems that make equitable service the default, rather than something that requires conscious effort for guests who don't fit traditional expectations. Travel blogger Yasmin Patel, who had been investigating the Sterling Grand during the discrimination incident, published her comprehensive analysis of both the problem and the response. Her article, titled "When Hospitality Fails and How One Hotel Chain Chose Accountability Over Denial," contrasted Thornton's discrimination with Olivia's swift, systematic response. Sterling Hotels faced a defining test of whether their stated values were genuine commitments or marketing rhetoric, Patel wrote. By immediately terminating discriminatory managers, implementing measurable reforms, and choosing transparency over damage control, ownership demonstrated that principles matter more than short-term reputation management. This is how companies should respond to discrimination, not with defensive deflection, but with honest accountability and structural change. The positive coverage helped mitigate reputational damage from the initial viral video of Thornton's discrimination, showing that the company's response matched its rhetoric about inclusive hospitality. Chief Diversity Officer Sarah Chen spent the week conducting individual interviews with all 63 Sterling Grand employees, creating a detailed picture of the culture that had developed under Thornton's management. Her findings were troubling but valuable. Discriminatory practices had been widespread but not universal, with some staff members maintaining integrity despite pressure while others had internalized bias as professional standards. About 40% of staff recognized the discrimination and felt uncomfortable. but didn't know how to challenge it safely, Chen reported to Olivia. Another 30% genuinely didn't recognize the patterns as discriminatory because they had normalized the behavior. The remaining 30% includes those who actively objected, like Vasquez, and those who actively participated in discrimination. The data informed targeted interventions, intensive retraining for those who had normalized discrimination, support and advancement for those who had maintained integrity, and termination for the few who had actively participated in discriminatory practices beyond what Thornton directly mandated. Olivia also commissioned an external audit of all 23 Sterling properties to ensure Chicago's problems weren't replicated elsewhere. The audit would assess guest satisfaction across demographics, interview staff about discriminatory practices, and evaluate whether property leadership embodied inclusive values or merely performed them for corporate inspections. "We're not just fixing one property," Olivia told her executive team. "We're ensuring that our entire organization lives up to the values we claim. That requires uncomfortable honesty about where we've failed and genuine commitment to systematic improvement." 6 months after the incident, Olivia returned to the Sterling Grand for an official assessment of the property's transformation. She arrived unannounced again, curious whether the reforms had produced genuine cultural change or merely temporary compliance that would fade once corporate attention shifted. Elsewhere, the changes were evident from the moment she walked through the entrance. Bellhop Andre Williams greeted her with the same genuine warmth he had shown during her previous visit. But now his welcome reflected institutional culture rather than individual character operating, despite management expectations. "Welcome back to the Sterling Grand, Mrs. Sterling," he said with a smile. "We've been hoping you'd return to see what we've built here," his comfort addressing her directly, without fear of managerial reprisal for familiarity with ownership, signaled the cultural shift Olivia had been working to create, where staff felt empowered rather than intimidated, where integrity was rewarded rather than punished. New Manager Maria Vasquez had implemented welcome audits, regular assessments where staff members of diverse backgrounds posed as guests to evaluate whether everyone received equivalent service regardless of appearance, age, race, or any other characteristic beyond their desire for quality hospitality. The results were reviewed monthly, with any disparities immediately investigated and addressed through retraining or, if necessary, personnel changes. "We don't wait for complaints to identify problems anymore," Vasquez explained as she walked Olivia through the property's transformation. "We proactively assess equity in service delivery and address gaps before they become patterns." The audit results were impressive. 6 months of data showed no statistically significant differences in how guests from different demographic backgrounds experienced check-in procedures, room assignments, restaurant service, or any other aspect of their stay. The 15% satisfaction gap that had existed under Thornton's management had been completely eliminated. Front desk clerk Jennifer Morrison, who had previously felt unable to challenge Thornton's discrimination, now served on the property's Inclusion Council, a staff-led group that advised management on creating equitable culture, reviewed guest feedback for potential bias, and developed training scenarios based on real situations that had occurred at the property. "We don't just say we're inclusive anymore," Morrison told Olivia during their conversation in the lobby. "We actively work on it every day, measure it with real data, and hold each other accountable for it. When someone slips into old patterns, treating certain guests differently based on assumptions, we address it immediately, through coaching rather than letting it fester into systematic problems." The council represented genuine employee empowerment, where frontline staff had meaningful input into policies and procedures rather than simply implementing decisions made by distant executives who didn't understand daily operational realities. The guest satisfaction gap had disappeared entirely, but more importantly, overall satisfaction had actually increased as the culture became more genuinely welcoming. Guests who had always received good service continued to receive it, while those who had been subtly marginalized under the previous culture now experienced the same level of hospitality. The transformation proved what Olivia had long believed. Genuine inclusivity didn't diminish service quality for anyone. It elevated the entire experience. Dr. Philip Chen returned to the Sterling Grand 6 months after his viral video, specifically choosing the property to see whether the reforms were genuine or performative. He checked in under his own name, presented his reservation for a suite, and was treated with immediate professional courtesy that acknowledged both his confirmed booking and his previous experience at the property. Dr. Chen. "Welcome back to the Sterling Grand," the front desk clerk said warmly. "We're honored that you've chosen to give us another opportunity to serve you. Your suite is ready, and please let us know if there's anything we can do to ensure your stay exceeds expectations." The acknowledgement of his previous visit without defensiveness or awkwardness demonstrated the cultural maturity the property had developed, able to own past failures while demonstrating present commitment to better service. Chen's experience throughout his 3-day stay was exceptional. He later wrote in a detailed review, "I returned to the Sterling Grand 6 months after witnessing blatant discrimination, specifically to evaluate whether the reforms I'd read about were real or performative. They're real! This property has transformed from a place where I witnessed a guest being denied service based on appearance to a genuine model of inclusive hospitality. Every staff interaction reflected authentic welcome rather than scripted courtesy. The culture change is palpable and appears sustainable." His endorsement carried particular credibility because of his initial viral documentation of Thornton's discrimination. The same person who had exposed the problem now validated the solution. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, the loyal 15-year Sterling customer who had witnessed the original discrimination, had returned to the Chicago property 3 times in the intervening months. "I wanted to see if the changes would last beyond the immediate crisis," she told Olivia during a chance encounter in the lobby. "What I've observed is that this property has become the best in your entire chain, not despite the discrimination incident, but because you used it as a catalyst for becoming genuinely better rather than just appearing better." On her final evening at the property, Olivia gathered the staff who had witnessed the original incident, Vasquez, Morrison, Williams, and others who had been present during Thornton's discrimination and her subsequent revelation as owner. "What happened here 6 months ago was painful," Olivia told the assembled group, "but it catalyzed changes that will protect countless future guests from discrimination. You turned a moment of failure into an opportunity for genuine transformation. More importantly, you've sustained that transformation beyond the initial crisis when corporate attention was focused here. That's what proves the culture change is real." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "But this work is never finished. Maintaining inclusive culture requires constant attention, regular evaluation, and willingness to address problems immediately rather than letting them fester. The moment we believe we've solved discrimination completely is the moment it starts creeping back. Bias is like rust. It requires ongoing maintenance to prevent, not a one-time fix." The metaphor resonated with staff, members who understood that cultural transformation required ongoing commitment rather than declarative achievement. Says Olivia prepared to leave Chicago the following morning. She reflected on the broader implications of the incident and its aftermath. One manager's discrimination had exposed systematic gaps in how Sterling hotels monitored culture versus metrics, how corporate oversight could miss warning signs hidden in aggregate data, and how stated values required constant reinforcement through accountability mechanisms to remain genuine rather than merely rhetorical. The crisis had been painful, but ultimately necessary, forcing the entire organization to align operations with principles. to build systems that made discrimination organizationally difficult to sustain, and to demonstrate that hospitality values weren't negotiable regardless of short-term financial implications. The Sterling Grand Hotel now stood as proof that luxury, hospitality, and genuine inclusivity could coexist, that making every guest feel valued wasn't just ethically right, but also excellent business practice that elevated the entire brand. And for Olivia Sterling, the experience reinforced her commitment to unannounced property visits, to measuring what mattered beyond revenue, and to building a hospitality empire where dignity and welcome were truly universal, rather than selectively granted based on prejudiced assumptions about who deserved quality service. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.